Okay. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. It is awesome to have you join me here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. It's so lovely to be here. So thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was chatting with you before we started recording. I would love, I did a little bit of research about your background just so I could be informed coming here to meet with you and then leaving kind of a lot of it to just be discovered in the moment. I love that I get to do that when the listener does too. Why don't you start out by sharing a little bit about how you ended up where you are today and a little bit about your origin story. I think there's an interesting tidbit I had picked up on that I shared with you before we started recording that I'd love to hear more about.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the best place to start is as a teenager, I was at a really academic school. I was a geek and I was like a straight A student. I think at the time, I got all my self-worth through achievement. I grew up in Northern Ireland as a queer kid, but not out. And the way I channeled all of that kind of pent up emotion was just to like achieve. I was like the golden child. So basically, the reason I'm sharing this is because I was then gently nudged down the avenue of medical school because I was super into science. I loved people. I had the grades, and my big sister was already at medical school. So it sounds like a weird thing to say, but it was like the easy option for me, you know? And I really wanted to do musical theater if I was like fully honest, but that's the avenue that I went down. So I was very blessed to receive offers for medical school, and at 18 I headed to medical school because in Europe we don't do pre-med. So I went to medical school at 18 and a lot of kids there were 17. So if you're from Republic of Ireland, if you're from Scotland, you can go to university at 17. So it was like a baptism of fire. You're thrown in the deep end. Week one, you're doing dissection work. You're taking blood from each other. You're doing all this crazy stuff. And at the time, there was no emotional support around these big events. There was no, oh, let's pull you aside. For some of you, you're going to see a dead body for the first time. You might feel a certain way, or no check-in afterwards. You might have vivid dreams tonight. That's okay. It was just like kind of survival of the fittest. So it was a really interesting experience. Medical school was a fantastic experience. Like, wow. I'm very blessed to have had that. But I knew quite early on that this probably wasn't the right avenue for me. Um, Again, I was young and I didn't have to pay for medical school because in UK at the time we paid like £1,000 a year for medical school. Can you imagine? So I graduated as a doctor. I worked as a doctor for a brief time, but I had the kind of privilege of being able to walk away from it because I was young and I didn't have debt. Now, if I had done that in America, I would have been late 20s. I would have had approaching $1 million in debt or whatever it is. So, I was able to. It almost didn't feel like a choice for me because I found being a junior doctor so stressful, and I didn't have the emotional intelligence as a 23-year-old to deal with the pressure that it didn't even feel like a choice. I walked away from it and then had to figure out what the hell am I gonna do. Towards the end of med school before graduating, I had been encouraged to take up meditation by a friend. And I'd heard about meditation, but I didn't know what it was because unlike today, where we see and hear meditation thrown around in conversation all the time, it just wasn't something that was talked about in general conversation. I took up meditation, and that was my gateway into yoga, spirituality. It kind of opened this vortex, and I was like, oh my God, there was kind of no going back. Um, so yeah, so that was it. And then so basically I pivoted. I ended up working in fashion. It sounds like a crazy thing to say with a medical degree, but the I moved to Australia and I really got into yoga. I was having a regular yoga practice, and that was a big priority for me for a few years. And then I had this epiphany. I see myself as the teacher. So I became a yoga teacher. I moved to London. I became a yoga teacher, and And that it was a slow journey for me. It was that, it was just taking things at my own pace, checking in with opportunities that came about. But then I also became a massage therapist and I was assisting on a course after I graduated. And one of the students knew my background and they said, Have you basically, why are you not teaching anatomy? I had never thought about it. The thought had never crossed my mind. And all of a sudden, I was like, okay, this is the next path. I'm now going to start to teach anatomy.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that reminds me of just a sort of a related experience in that when I began to teach anatomy, I was setting up for a training I was going to do. And some of the students were filing in, and this woman and I got into a conversation as I was setting up, and she shared she was a physical therapist. And I remember thinking, who am I to be teaching anatomy? And this woman in my training is a physical therapist. She already knows about anatomy. But the interesting thing, and I think you even mentioned this on your website, was at the end, she said to me, even though I understood anatomy, I didn't understand how to apply it to cueing and sequencing. So that's what I really gained. So does that sort of experience resonate with you and the students you teach?
100% because this is no disrespect to my original yoga teacher training, but I remember coming away from it thinking, I don't know how to apply what we've learned in terms of anatomy to the practice, you know? And I was like, even as a someone that has a medical qualification, I'm not fully clear on how to apply this. So that was really amazing for me because I then went on a journey of figuring out how to do it. Like, how, like what, like re ultimately, what do I need to know as a yoga teacher? And I started to look at anatomy in a different way because yes, I've studied anatomy in a great depth in the past, but it was all through the lens of disease, essentially. It was all through pathology. We didn't look at the gluteus maximus and talk about the movements that it helped make happen or anything to do with that. It was all through a specific lens. So I knew the nerve innervation of the gluteus maximus and all these details, but I didn't have any practical information that I could bring to like movement and wellness. So that was a really cool journey for me personally as a young yoga teacher to go down to figure out what do I need to know and how do I gain this knowledge? How do I apply this? And then once that kind of started to fall into place, I was like, I really want to share this with other people because I think there's a lot of people out there that don't know how to apply this. And that's really been my path for the last kind of 15, approaching 15 years has been, how do I distill this information? How do I figure out what's relevant, what isn't? And then how do we actually apply it to teaching and to practicing? So it's been a really, really fun journey.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's such an important distinction. And I often talk about in my 10-step blueprint, there's step 1 through 7, which is learning the essential lessons of anatomy for teaching yoga. And then step 8, 9, and 10 is applying it to cueing, sequencing, and myofascial release. And I always talk about that distinction. I feel like, though, for many yoga teachers, when they're done with their 200 hour and they feel like they didn't learn anatomy, they try to learn it on their own by doing what you said. They buy books and they try to just dump it in their brain. And there's no, how do I apply it? Because that's hard to get out of a book. How do you help teachers now that you had early in your journey to defining what you want to do? How do you help them apply it to teaching?
Yeah. I think the big thing is, like you're saying, like create the foundation. So there's a certain amount of knowledge that you kind of need to have there as the building blocks, and then it's like using that to basically understand the why behind what we typically do and say as teachers.
Yes, I
No,
call that the why behind the cue. So I
that's
oftentimes say, this
fun.
is what you say, right? And you can even think of this like as an actor, like if I'm saying a line, but if the director is directing me with respect to what's the emotion of the actor, now I can say the line with the appropriate emotion behind it. And so the viewer is now drawn into my story. I just watched the Tonys last night, so I'm all
Oh, nice.
infused.
Yeah.
Right? But for teaching, exactly what you said, there's what you say and there's what you know. And a lot of yoga teachers tell me, and you tell me if you hear this too, they're saying the cue without understanding the why behind it. So it's sort of a robotic experience.
And I understand that. I think the thing with me is that, and I'm sure it's very similar with you, is I've also been on this path. Like I'm not coming from a place like, well, I'm a doctor, I know everything. I had to go on this journey. I just now also want to help other people on the journey. And also my journey is still happening, you know? So um yeah, I think that has been really helpful because I think also I felt a bit of imposter syndrome as a younger teacher because I would repeat things that I heard on a training or that I heard in a workshop or read in a book, but I didn't fully understand why. I felt like I should say them, but I don't understand why. And it just meant that I struggled to find the joy sometimes in teaching. And then occasionally I would have someone ask me, so why do you say this? And then I would kind of struggle to answer it. And that felt really uncomfortable for me because
Right.
I was like, this is struggling to build a trust. And also I had an opportunity there to impart knowledge and I'm calling myself a teacher, but maybe I'm just an instructor at the moment because I'm telling people what to do, but not, I don't have really the full understanding to back up why. So it was just a really great journey. And I think also it's helped me to guide teachers into saying, well, look, maybe we could say this a different way, or maybe we don't need to say that. Maybe that's something that we say as teachers, but actually, maybe we don't need to say it. And the class is going to go on fine without it. So it's like also, I think, like for me personally, the more that I've been able to like apply the anatomy, actually, the less I say.
Yes, yes. When you were speaking before about your experience of saying stuff and not knowing the why and having the knowledge that you don't know the why, right? So there's the unconscious incompetence in that learning journey where I don't even know that I don't know. But then there's the next stage of conscious incompetence where I know that I don't know the why for this cue. So I call that speaking from what you know so your confidence can grow because the connection between, and I remember very early on when I was teaching anatomy, somebody who was leading the training came up to me and we were talking about a particular cue and I asked her the why for the cue she was training her trainees on and she said I don't actually know but that's what I was trained to say and
Yeah.
this literally could have been 15 years ago and I remember in that moment thinking what a disempowering thing to say as a teacher. I don't know but that's what I was trained to say as if I'm giving up my agency to this person who trained me. But isn't that the whole basis of how yoga teachers tend to be trained? That there's this person, she could be, he could be, they could be running a local studio, running a teacher training, or it could be one of the people who wrote the books everybody has, leading an online training with thousands. And there's this deference between the student teacher and the teacher. It's the guru model, is what I refer to it as. And all of a sudden, the trainees abdicate their like authority over their own thoughts or even questioning. Well,
Yeah.
why should I squeeze the glutes and bridge? What glutes? Why should I blah, blah, blah? So I guess what I'm wondering is how do you help people understand the why? Because for a lot of teachers listening, they're going to say, okay, great, I'm on board. And how do I get to be the kind of teacher who knows what I'm talking about, which helps me diffuse that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, because there's two pieces there, isn't there? Where it's like we choose often to put people on a pedestal.
Mm.
Yeah. But then also, how is that person holding space that means that I look at them in that way? So it's like a two-way dynamic that we have to take responsibility for. And yeah, I think again, I think for me, when it's like really stripping stuff like back to basics can really help. And then as we're doing that, it can be like, well, how does this piece of knowledge then make you think about that thing that we say as a teacher? You know, so even like even as something as simple as when you're talking about muscle in general, most, you know, all muscles have at least 2 points of attachment, an origin and insertion, just very simple. And basically, it's more nuanced than this, but stretching a muscle is moving those 2 points of attachment further away, and contracting it tends to then bring the 2 points closer together. Like very over, like almost oversimplified. But then when you talk about that, you think, well, let's relate that to how we say, oh, yoga lengthens our hamstrings over time. Well, what would that mean? It would mean that A, the points of attachment have over time moved further and further away and continue to, or the muscle would become longer and almost like saggy because if the 2 points of attachment stay together. So then it makes us question, oh, like does muscle lengthen over time? And then we now have science to back up the fact that it's very unlikely. And then that leads us down the fact that it's really the nervous system that is kind of conducting how the muscle behaves. So does that make sense? So it's like these little things that it's like even when something is a simple concept, it's like let's now talk about that in relation to what we normally do. So it's just those fun like building blocks, and then we kind of build upon that through a course or a workshop or something like that. Yeah, it's a really fun thing, and it's just again encouraging the questioning because again
Right.
you said that I love the way you phrased that. It's like because it's okay not to know. It's okay not to know. Like a 200-hour training, even a 300 or 500-hour training, it's not a lot of hours. So it's like it's okay not to know. And I think that's an very, very empowered place to be in to say, I don't know. And I'm okay with that. I want to know. I want to go on a journey to find out. And I'm inquisitive, but it's okay not to know. And to start off in that place and go, I don't know. That feels uncomfortable. Okay, I don't know now I'm getting a bit more comfortable not
Mhm.
knowing. Let's now find out, you know?
Mhm.
So it's just, it's just taking a step-by-step approach
Mhm.
with it.
So when you decided that you wanted to, when you had this epiphany, this person said, "Oh, you should train yoga teachers on anatomy," and you had this epiphany of, "Wow, this is my purpose." How did you shift your brain from all the knowledge you had accumulated and the application of that knowledge in a clinical setting, most likely regarding disease, to whittling it down and sort of culling out from everything the things? How did you shift your brain? And then I assume the next step was, here's a package of things I can present to people.
Yeah, I think it was honestly just going back to basics, almost as if I was trying to like wipe my knowledge, because also it's all that confirmation bias and all the things. Like often, the more knowledge we have about a topic, the harder it is to see it with fresh eyes. So I really just had to be like, I almost had to put myself in the place of a teacher that just maybe hadn't studied biology since high school, and I had to really just reframe it and be like, okay, let's get back, and then as I started to really break it down, I was like, if this piece really cannot be related to yoga, and if it doesn't, it's not part of a building block that helps us move towards a certain thing, maybe we don't need to talk about it. Maybe it's not a priority. So maybe let's put that to the side and see, does that even need to be discussed or not? So yeah, it was a fun journey, and it evolved because I remember the very first time I taught anatomy, it was a success. I enjoyed it. I was able to be present, but it was just a learning curve. Just like everything, I had to go, okay, um, you know, that way of making this practical or making it relevant, that worked really well. This just didn't. This part didn't work. Or how not, what could I do with the students when we're talking about fascia that could really get them to feel it? You know, oh, I'm going to go and buy like two-way ply lycra so that we can do this like stretching experiment. So honestly, it was just an evolution. It was just, step by step, just like teaching a class. You're not going to be perfect in the first class. If you want to get better, you just have to show up and teach. And that's just what I did. I just took as many opportunities as I could as a young anatomy teacher just to um yeah, just to play with it and be experimental and reflect a lot of reflection, a lot of did this work, a lot of feedback from students. So all of this can be you can if you're not wanting to teach anatomy, but you're teaching yoga, you can use all of this, in that context also. Um, Sometimes recording myself and listening back. Was that clear? Was it not?
Mhm.
giving people homework and then realizing, oh, they don't know how to answer the homework. So clearly we need to like look at this in a different way. So yeah, it was a really fun journey. And wow, what a learning curve.
Mm.
And I'm still evolving it. I'm still changing up the way I teach anatomy and still looking at how I can do things better or differently. And it's a
Mm.
fun thing. It's a lot of fun because I'm just always challenged. I'm sure you feel the same way. Like I feel like it's
Yeah.
it's this path that's probably never going to end.
Yeah, I think learning different ways to present the concepts so that they stick, whether it's using visual aids or slides or whatever it is always a fun part of teaching anatomy because there are endless possibilities in terms of how you can present these concepts, and it's looking for those new ways to do it as you get feedback that it's not sticking 100%. That I think is a testament to your commitment to having people get it. So one of the things that I hear a lot from teachers, and I think the first thing I hear is I didn't learn anatomy very well, if at all, in my 200-hour training. I've been training teachers on anatomy for many, many years, and it always blows my mind how it doesn't matter what training they took, where they are in the world. That is a really common experience. And what I found is after that experience, people develop an identity. I can't learn it. I
Yeah.
tried, I can't. It's too hard. I'm not the kind of person who can. So how would you respond to that? Or how, if you hear that, how do there's also sort of the identity shift that needs to happen for that kind of teacher. Because you can ultimately continue to teach, know that you don't understand anatomy, and just choose to stay in that identity. And you can teach from action, and that's okay. But there's a whole other world available to you when you really understand what's going on. So how do you help people with that identity problem? I don't want to say it's a problem, that identity that they
I yeah, I love reframing things.
yeah,
So basically, when if someone says to me, "Oh, I really struggled with anatomy. I don't remember anything with training." I'm like, you know what? You're actually in the perfect scenario because you're
mm,
coming in with a fresh slate
mm,
and all these other people that feel like they kind of get it, they're going to have all this confirmation bias and all this cognitive dissonance happening. And I'm like, you're coming in with a fresh slate. You're actually the person that's going to get the most out of this.
love that. Yeah, I love that.
And
Sometimes I say, it's not you, it's how it was presented to you. Because I really feel sometimes I hear these crazy stories from teachers like, oh, we had a physical therapist in our training. So the studio owner said one day, oh, Sally's going to teach us some anatomy. And all of a sudden, Sally, the trainee, is all of a sudden now a presenter in the heat of the moment. And well, okay. Or we had a doctor come and it was so clinical that I really felt overwhelmed. So there's all these sort of stories in the field that
yeah,
nobody knows until someone like me, someone like you, who has the role of teaching anatomy, can start to hear from a lot of people all over the world. And, Yoga Alliance isn't doing this recon, so they don't know what's going on. And so, people like us are getting these stories, and now we're hearing like, wow, there's such a variance in how it's taught. And that's so I usually say to people, hey, it's not you, it's how you were trained. I'm
absolutely.
going to teach you with a methodology that I've used over and over and over again and refined it, just like you were saying before.
Yeah, and also reminding people like, learning off all the names of the bones and muscles, that doesn't make you a better teacher. It's the concepts behind it. So what I try to do is encourage people, whether they're doing something in person with me or they're doing something online, it's like take time on a break to reflect on what we've covered and write down 4 or 5 things that you really want to take away with you. And then if you can go home and share those with someone in your life or share them with a student, you've got a really good chance of retaining that information. And it's just baby steps. It's just building on that. Like it would be great if we could walk into the experience and just like upload the information. That's not how it works. So it's like just be kind to yourself. This is a journey, just like your yoga journey is this long, long path. The anatomy journey is very similar. And also, I'm on that path. Like, there's still things like I'm not the all-knowing person. So a big piece of this is also been me getting comfortable as an anatomy teacher saying, I don't know,
Mm.
you know, and then that reminds people that it's also okay at this point in your journey to not know.
Yeah.
I never want to be that person that's like, oh, I'm just going to bullshit something. I'm just going to make up an answer. No, I don't know the kind of, I'm not the fountain of knowledge, of ever-ending knowledge. So, and also like I have blind spots. I have gaps in my knowledge, and then it's like, I can't know everything about every topic, but also what I do is I commit to always challenging myself, always questioning myself and always being open. So for example, like I'm going to be really honest, like up until a couple of years ago, I had a very outdated idea about yoga and osteoporosis. I had basically drank the Kool-Aid and I'd seen the headlines of some of these studies, and it says that yoga can reverse osteoporosis. I've got my mom then got diagnosed with osteoporosis, and I took a massive interest and went into a deep, deep dive into it. I spent months looking at all the research and everything. And my conclusion now is yoga can help in many ways, but it's not progressive enough to have like a meaningful impact on your bone mineral density long term. It can reduce the risk of falls, huge, huge. It can increase your body awareness, it can decrease stress. That has a positive impact on bone health. But it's like, I also have blind spots. So it's like I remind teachers that we're all on a journey. I'm on the journey as well. We're just maybe at different stages on different topics, and just be compassionate towards yourself, be kind to yourself, and just show up each day in the way that you can. You know.
Mm.
So I think leading by example is a big part of this.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk a little bit about, for the teacher who's listening, and I'm going to cover like a specific avatar here. The teacher who's listening and who's been teaching for some amount of time, not a brand new teacher. Because oftentimes the brand new teachers have the awareness of what they don't know because they're so close to their 200-hour graduation.
Yeah.
Somebody who's been out there teaching for a while, and kind of like I was describing before, they are, by their own assessment, things are going okay. But if they took an anatomy test, like maybe they would think I probably wouldn't do very well, or maybe by their own admission, they might say, yeah, things are going well, but I know that I don't really understand the anatomy. I remember in training, I didn't pick up a lot. Let's talk a little bit about what is available to you as a teacher when you understand the fundamentals of anatomy that isn't available when you don't. Because I think if you can describe that from your own experience, going from I know anatomy as a doctor to I'm a practicing yogi to
Yeah.
epiphany of I now want to teach anatomy for yoga to culling out of the big topic of anatomy, just what you feel yoga teachers need to know, to now sharing that with teachers and seeing the up level that happens in your trainees, what can you say that describes what is available to me? Because if I just stay at the level of, well, now you'll know anatomy, I feel like that doesn't really explain the transformation.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. This is maybe going to surprise some people, but it's like you realize that less is more. I think it's all about like, man, I think for me, what I witness in some teachers is you gain the confidence to say less. You gain the confidence to um give less cues and ask more questions. So there's more room for exploration when you go down the journey more. You become more boundaried. So again, it's like you become more confident or comfortable saying, I don't know. You also, as you learn more and grow more and even study more anatomy, you become more clear about your role as a yoga teacher. So the scope of a yoga teacher, you refine your language so that you can be supportive, but that it's not in a way where you're trying to fix people, because that's beyond our scope as a teacher. So I think that's the thing. I think it's for me, it's less about, oh, I now know exactly every muscle activation in every pose. That's a fun thing, but it's like it's more like the nuance and the confidence and the way we show up just changes as we dedicate ourselves to learn more. I think we end up realizing that I don't need to say 10 things in downward dog just because I have all these cues that I want to share. You learn to pare it back a little bit. You just learn to become more aware of how you're holding space and even the language you use to talk to someone. Like someone could come to class and they could say, "Oh, I have a slip disc L4 to L5," and maybe as a younger teacher, you're like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry to hear that," and wow, like it's amazing that you could still show up to class with that. And then maybe as like a more developed yoga teacher with more knowledge about the introvertible disc, you go, "Okay, I really appreciate you sharing with me. How do you think I can support you today?" Like that's a very different
Yeah.
dynamic.
Yeah. No, I love that. I liken that to when I have this conversation, the shift that you're describing with the second avatar teacher comes from a place of I don't have to fix this person. This person has agency over being here. They are here of their own will with the knowledge,
Yeah.
unlike a lot of people that have slip discs and probably don't feel it yet, right?
Yeah.
So they have the knowledge, they made the choice to be here. I don't need to fix them. I love that you said that. And so now my question, sometimes I coach teachers to ask, okay, thanks for sharing that with me. Can you tell me how that impacts your movement? Because
Yes.
now I'm in my, right, you would agree with that. Now I'm in my professional scope of practice, not the, oh my God, it's my job to fix this person.
Like, or someone comes with medical terminology and you don't know
Right,
what that is. That's okay.
right.
It's not your job to know. How is this affecting you today?
Yes, yeah. Now
To
you're talking
me, to
on
me,
the
that's the more important. That's the juicy
yeah,
thing because you could have two people side by side with the same injury, but they have a whole different experience. It's unique to them. So it's you start to over time realize what is important and what's less important. What questions do I need to ask to tease out the information that might be helpful? Like it's more helpful to know, can you easily get onto the floor and back up again? Rather than all this like the medical diagnosis and all the info, all that detail, it's like the practicalities of it that I think you realize, oh, that this is more important. But it's only with growing your knowledge can you get to that place.
right. Yeah, I appreciate what you said earlier too about talking a lot. And what you found is the more you understand anatomy, you speak less or you give less cues. And I think in my observation of teachers without the fundamentals, the oversharing is a compensatory strategy. So behind it, there's a belief, well, I don't really understand. Maybe they don't literally say, I don't understand anatomy, but there's that lack of confidence, that imposter syndrome, and the behavior that is a result of that belief or that identity is I'm going to say a lot of things. I sometimes make the metaphor, it's like if you walk in the room and the lights are out, but you don't know where the light switch is, you're sort of feeling around for the light switch.
Yeah.
Right. So if I take that metaphor and I overlay it on teaching downward dog, I'm not really sure what to say because I don't really understand the anatomy of the pose. So I'm going to say a lot of things, push away, rotate your inner eyes, the elbows out, I'm just going to be saying all these things thinking something's got to stick here.
Yeah. And also there tends to be a lot of micromanaging. Like I'll speak from experience. I used to do that. I used to micromanage. As a younger teacher, I would literally tell people in every moment how to breathe, what kind of breath to inhale, exhale. I'd also be like, you have to place your hands exactly in this position. There wasn't room for like, well, each individual, we have individual anatomy. We're coming with our own intention for the poses, whether we're fully aware or not with their own injuries. Like there's all these layers that add. So it's like with time, I've been able to just leave space for, yes, we're all gonna try to create some sort of like where if you walked into class, I want it to be clear that, oh, we're all doing downward dog. But if you were to look at everyone, but it's like, but it's going to look different for every person. And where's the space to allow people to find that in their own bodies, And also as a younger teacher, it's kind of weird. I almost had this idea that I knew someone's body better than they did. And then it's like, well, with more education and more learning, I realized no, like that person is the expert of their own body. Like, who am I to say what they should or shouldn't do. Like I have to give them the agency to start to make decisions for themselves. And that can be a journey, but
Yeah,
it's like if we don't start them off, then they're never gonna walk down that path. They're always going to expect us to continue to tell them what to do in
right.
every moment.
Yeah, I think when you were talking earlier about your origin story and some of what you experienced growing up and sort of that expectation that you would go to medical school and your identity, and it got me thinking about a teacher I worked with in my one-on-one program, and she was raised in a home where her father was a perfectionist. So
Mhm.
fast forward to her going to teacher training, coming out of teacher training and starting to teach, she identifies as a perfectionist. So just what you said, 100%. She's teaching her classes. Not only does she expect them to be doing it perfectly, even with a little acknowledgement that everybody's different, but really in regards to her experience teaching, it has to be perfect. So I feel like for a lot of yoga teachers, there's that sort of rigid view. And in a way, maybe the expectation that if I understood anatomy, it's not as if I'm going to appreciate the nuance more. I feel like people almost feel like if I really truly understood anatomy, I'm going to be able to do more of the right things more, which isn't it sort of paradoxical that the more you know, the more you realize there's so much nuance.
Exactly. And there's more questions. There are more questions than there are answers. And that's also okay. That's something exciting
Yeah.
about the journey.
Yeah.
It's just, it's
Yeah, that's definitely another opportunity for a reframe. Now, the thing though that I want to drop in here, and I'd be curious to see what you think of this, is in my conversations with teachers, a lot of times the learning of anatomy is to quell the fear and worry that my students will get hurt.
yeah.
So there's this equation. If I understand the fundamentals of anatomy, I can talk about reframe. I can prevent my students from getting hurt, or this will help me feel less worried that they'll get hurt. Like I'm
Right.
purposefully up talking because this is what they say. They're not sure if even what they're saying is a logical expectation. So what comes up for you when you hear that?
Oh, shameless plug. I've written a book
Oh,
on the topic. It's called Supporting Yoga Students with Common Injuries and Conditions. So obviously,
perfect.
I'm going to try to distill a book's worth of content into
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
answer. Yeah, so basically, well, the first piece is the beautiful news is there's actually been a lot of good quality research that's looked into how injurious yoga is, particularly compared to other forms of physical activity. And yoga is a very safe form of physical activity. Now, it doesn't mean that shit can't happen and that we can't injure ourselves. I've injured myself in a yoga class, but compared to other forms of physical activity, yoga is pretty safe. So I think we have to remind ourselves of that because that's the challenge with a little bit of knowledge, like coming out of a training with the 200 hours. It's like it's just a little bit of knowledge, but then we can go down the fear side where we have to like protect people. And also with yoga philosophy, we talk about ahimsa, we talk about no harm, and I think sometimes we take that very literally. We can't wrap people in cotton wool because even if someone's coming to your class twice a week, every week, what are they doing for all the other hours that they're not there? Like, are you following them home and saying, no, no, don't bend over and tie your shoelaces like that? Like, we just can't. So I think that's the first piece. I think we have to remind ourselves that yoga is actually very safe compared to other forms of physical activity. I think there's certain things we can do as a yoga teacher to kind of mitigate the chance of injury, but ultimately a lot of it's out of our control. I think we can not use physical force on students. I've had that a lot where I've been injured in a class because someone has physically adjusted me in lotus pose and I've sprained my ankle in that pose. So I've had a lot of that. I've had someone like, I used to practice Ashtanga, so very physical. I had someone adjust me in leg behind the head, and then I did something to my sacral leg joint because that's such an extreme pose. So there's things like that, but also a lot of it's out of our control. Like there's research that tells us that if you have a bad night's sleep, 2 days later, you have a higher chance of injuring yourself. So what are we going to start to filter that and say at the start of class, okay, Hands up if you didn't sleep well 2 nights ago. Okay, you need to leave because you're at a higher risk of injuring yourself, you know? So I think there's certain things we can do, and I think certain ways that we can hold space, we can keep encouraging people, take it at your own pace. We're not really here to push. Connect your breath, rest when you need to, just keep, normalize the use of props. All the things that we can keep doing to kind of cultivate the right space, but ultimately people show up with their own intentions and sometimes want to force themselves, and there's just sometimes there's very little we can do about it, you know. So I think I encourage people, think of it as a spectrum. On one end, you could care less. On the other end, you're like literally trying to wrap a student in cotton wool and all this. I really try to get people to try to find the middle ground. What's the
Yeah.
spot in the middle? Because when you're on this end and you're fearful, you use fear-based language. You use a lot of protect, do this to protect, do this to protect. Don't place your foot against your knee in tree pose to protect the knee. That literally triggers the student's nervous system. And over time, you're also instilling the idea that the knee is inherently fragile. It's not. Like, we are robust, resilient human beings that have been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years. Like, we're not going to spontaneously combust if we place our foot against our knee in tree pose. So yeah, I think it's a journey, and that's another beautiful piece. I think the more anatomy, more physiology you learn, you move away from the fear-based place into that
Yeah.
middle ground, you know?
Yeah. I think anytime I did a video on this the other day on Instagram, anytime you're using fear-based cueing, if you ever are to use it, number one, you should use it intentionally because it does trigger their nervous system. And it also triggers their cognition in terms of, okay, if this person's giving me this warning, what's the bad thing that's going to happen? And typically, in my experience of talking with teachers, they've picked those fear-based cues up from somebody else.
Yeah.
And they haven't questioned, well, what is the bad thing that's going to happen? Do
And
I
does that make sense?
Yeah. And it also makes literally no account for frequency and duration.
Yeah.
And when I posted my video last week on foot on the knee and tree, somebody commented that in their classes as a student, the teacher has them holding tree pose for 15 minutes, which I found rather odd. And I commented back because this person was commenting to my video saying, well, in my class that I take, we hold tree for 15 minutes, and therefore it could have an injurious effect. And I said, well, you're bringing up frequency and duration, which is another variable that people don't consider with regard to this entire conversation. And I would say that that's an outlier. Most people are not having their students hold tree for 15 minutes.
And also our body adapts constantly. So
That too.
adaptation. And to kind
Yeah.
I think a lot of these cues essentially come from the negativity bias, because when something is perceived to be negative, we're more likely to hear it, we're more likely to retain that information, and then we're more likely to share it with other people, which is why the majority of very, very common yoga cues out there have a negative slant to them, you know? So it's just being mindful of that piece. We're more likely
Yeah.
to share bad news with someone than good news, like in general, you know, or think of as a teacher, you get 5 people coming up at the end of the class going, oh, I really enjoyed that. You have one person that left during Shavasana. Who are you going to go home thinking about? You're going to think about that one student that maybe looked grumpy or miserable and left, negativity bias. We're like, it's almost like it keeps us safe, by focusing on more on the negative. Uh,
Yeah. I think too, when people hear cues to the negative, they assume authority from the person who's saying it because it's a warning, like a warning on a product. And so they, again, the guru model, they defer knowledge to that person that they don't have. And who doesn't want to go into the room and say something negative and appear to be in the know about some
Because it's also clickbaity, isn't it? It's like a negative headline. I did a piece about this recently because I said, look, if you're a teacher and your students are constantly coming to you with all their baggage and kind of almost like laying it in front of you with an expectation, hold accountability for yourself and think about how you're holding space. Because if you are putting yourself in that position of authority, if you're using fear-based language, if you're telling people what to do in every moment, if you are speaking in a way that makes it sound like you know someone's body better than they know it, you people are going to come to you with their baggage and expect you to fix them from with help them out of a pain cycle and all this kind of stuff. But when you can subtly start to change that over time, you will notice that less people come to you with those expectations. Um, yeah, so we have to take accountability for that as teachers. I think that it's sometimes like, oh, these students they expect so much. Yeah, but how are you personally feeding into that?
Right. Yeah, I talk about that as an energetic cord between the teacher and the student, and that can be on a bunch of different levels. But this, what you're talking about, the teacher that goes in the room and starts out, not that there's anything wrong with this, but I'm just going to share it as an example. Okay, we're going to start in a few minutes. Does anybody have any injuries? Please tell me what they are. And so now the expectation has been set that student A is going to say what their injury is. Me as a teacher now has to say something curated to that person's experience to take care of them, to prevent them from getting hurt. How can I do that? So I love what you said, that introspective look to see how am I contributing to this somewhat unhealthy experience of the student to be dependent on me to clarify what's going on in their body.
Yeah, 100%. I really love the language you use, Karen. I love that. I've really enjoyed the way you've described the model you use. It's really thoughtful, like really intentional. I think it's really lovely that you
Thanks.
created
Thank you.
there, like really
Yeah,
meaningful.
it's come from years of working with teachers and like you said, looking for what are the common themes, how are different ways I can state this so that it really sticks. I'm curious too, when you were talking before about that we were talking about yoga being safe or unsafe. One of the things that I hear from teachers, especially teachers who are teaching classes with people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and maybe older, there's definitely concern about injury related to age. And there's also sort of a diluting of the practice, anticipating that the person can't do it. And a perfect example of this is teachers who teach classes with a lot of women in their 50s and 60s and 70s don't want to teach. They tell me this. I don't want to teach high to low push up because my students can't do it. It's too hard for them. So while I heard what you said before about everybody has agency of over what they do and they're going to do it their own way, and we shift to that position as a teacher, the more we understand about anatomy, is there also space for the validity of challenging people, even just on a musculoskeletal level? You were talking about your mom and osteoporosis, right? To maybe even if we just look at it clinically to combat some of the effects of aging on the female body, if we just focus on female students.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about maybe my lack of anatomy knowledge, my fear that people are going to get hurt, the type of class I teach with people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s? I'm worried about them in particular due to their age. So I'm taking things away from them. I'm not giving them the choice. I'm just
Yeah.
deciding for them. I'm not even going to show you how to do this.
There's two things come up. First of all, there's a lot of assumptions there, isn't there? That because this is a person in an older category that, just don't assume. I think don't assume is just such a great overall kind of ethic, if for want of a better word to have. Just don't assume in any scenario. So I think don't assume, don't decide for people, I think. Also, it's like we can also assume that chair yoga is therefore easy as well. There's a lot of assumptions made because you can do a very challenging chair yoga practice. So because also a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to teach chair yoga because it's too easy. No, it doesn't have to be. So just think outside the box. Don't assume. And always offer options, always build from the ground upwards and let people figure out where they're happy to pause. Like where, um, what does their full expression look like today? You know?
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, I think it's a really important thing. Also, look, with the group of students we're talking about, the slightly older, let's say postmenopausal woman, yes, of course, osteoporosis has to come into the conversation. Okay. But and yes, and look, the big thing, the big focus with this is fracture. If you have osteoporosis, you have a higher risk of fracture. But what the research tells us is that um, fractures very rarely happen through physical activity. Okay, they normally happen essentially through falls. Okay, so it doesn't mean that it can't happen, but just know that what is much worse is someone being completely sedentary. It's much worse for them. So the fact that we're encouraging them to be physically active, that is the key thing. Yes, there has to be parameters for certain groups, but a fracture in a physical activity context is fairly rare, particularly when we're comparing it to what happens in a fall. And also yoga and things like that are going to help prevent falls. So it's a nuanced balance there. It's not black or white. But I
Right.
think we do need to reflect on that, just as you've said, that the way that often people can shy away from challenging people of certain groups, and maybe that's the group that need to be challenged the most.
Yeah, I'm reminded, I actually have to go back and pull the reference, but two times over the years, one was in a conference, a virtual conference I was at on clinical studies of the musculoskeletal system. I've heard of a study done in Australia of women in their 80s and 90s where they had a short-term resistance training program and all the gains that they had made. And they were, like I said, 80s and 90s. So I think of that study often when we have this conversation because it shows that even in older age, you can build muscle mass. And so
Uh,
if we now overlay that empirical evidence onto teaching yoga and plank to low plank, even in somebody in their 80s, that's using your body for resistance. So that would suggest that with proper watching the students and modifications, they can build the muscle.
Absolutely. And it's never too late. The body is always adapting. It adapts until the moment we die. So,
Right.
it's yes, absolutely. And, particularly um, with muscle, it has such an impact on our overall health
Yeah.
as we age. You know,
Yeah. And I think about women as estrogen goes down, muscle mass goes down. So you need to do more physical things to compensate for that.
Yeah. And this is one of the big, I know it's a side topic, but this is one of the big things with Ozempic and a lot of the drugs that are helping with weight loss. One of the key ways they help with weight loss is they decrease muscle mass, and that can have a big impact on people's general quality of life and health. So it's like, again, these drugs work very well for certain groups of people, but you have to also be very physically active. You have to be keeping your muscle mass up there, or you're going to get tons of side effects from the decrease in muscle mass. And as
Yeah.
we age, every year we age, we lose muscle mass, men or women, it's the same with bone density. Obviously, it happens at different rates for different groups of people and different age categories. But yeah, super important. I want to be as active as possible when I'm older. Like I'm already getting there. But it's like, I'm just very conscious of that. As each year passes, each decade, I want to be almost even more active.
Mhm. Yeah, I in March paid out of pocket for a bone density scan, adipose tissue reading. I'm sorry, not adipose, visceral fat reading, as well as well, bone density, visceral fat, and
Muscle.
muscle mass, lean muscle mass. And I got a baseline. So when I had my annual endocrinology visit, he just does like a thyroid scan and that sort of thing. I gave him those test results, which were fine. But it wasn't like he had prescribed that. I didn't have a clinical reason to get a full body scan. So I paid $300, but
Yeah.
now he has my baseline. I'm 60. So as I continue to age, he'll have that baseline. So I would just
That's amazing, by the way.
Oh, thank. I would just say for,
You can tell me later what your secrets are because
oh,
I need
well,
to
I was just,
know.
I mean, the reason I bring it up is because these are the kinds of things from a health and wellness perspective that people sometimes balk at paying. But $300 to me is nothing to get to what you're talking about. Get some reading about what's going on with my book, because I can't otherwise know what's going on unless I do some kind of test to test it out. But Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what you're saying is really with the anatomy knowledge, you build your confidence, and that translates in part to not being afraid to challenge your students because you feel like that safety issue is not really valid. I mean, I love what you said before about it's yoga is no more or less risky than any other form of exercise. And I really hope the listener is hearing that because I think the narrative in the yoga world is oftentimes contrary to that. And that's
Yeah.
what people think they need to wrap people in plastic wrap, bubble wrap, because they've been hearing these unsafe cues or these warning cues and have that fear. So thank you for bringing that up. So let me just ask you, I have kind of a million other questions, but let me just ask you one other
Let's
question.
do a part two at some point. Yeah.
Yes, we'll do a part two for sure. Um, Tell us a little bit about um, sort of how you're sharing information, like the trainings that you're doing. I mean, we're in a post-COVID world, so a lot of things happen online. For the person listening who is maybe buying books to learn anatomy, like I have my own sort of feeling about that as sort of not always the most dynamic way to learn something that's really greatly learned in a conversation. But just tell me a little bit about how are people learning from you? What are the kinds of things you're doing with them? Is it online? Is it in person? What kinds of things are out there that you're doing?
Yeah, it's a mixture of all of that. I do love in person, but some stuff in the UK this summer. I'm going to be teaching more in America next year, which is exciting. Um, I love online learning. I used to be such a snob about it, but with COVID, we had no choice, and I think it's wonderful. I think it can be done in such a empowering, supportive way. And yeah, so basically. Up until now, I've had a lot of different offerings, different courses, workshops, and the exciting thing is it's June now. Later this month, I'm actually launching an education-based online membership community for yoga teachers. It's called the Enlightened Yoga Collective, and it's in collaboration with my partner Matthew Huey. We both wrote a book called The Physiology of Yoga that came out a few years ago, an evidence-based look at how yoga interacts with each system of the body and that's been received really, really well. And basically, we've collaborated to create this beautiful community where everything that we offer is housed under one roof, and it's basically like a monthly membership. And we're just really excited. It's going to be a super supportive community because you're going to get support from us, from other teachers. And also, we're going to add in elements, not just anatomy and physiology, but also business elements, because there are so many skills that are expected of us as teachers that we're just not trained on. So it's going to be like Matt and I have built our businesses single-handedly, which, I'm sure the same with you, Karen. How to build your website, how to grow your newsletter list, how to run a retreat, how to run a workshop, how to write a yoga book. I've written two in my, two full books and I've contributed to others. There's just so many things that we want to offer and add this like really creative, like collaborative space for people. So I'm really excited. So I love online learning. I think it's when it's done in the right way, it's just super accessible for so many people. And then people don't have to pay to come to London or New York or whatever it is to be with me. Although that is magical if we can make it happen. But it's like, yeah, I just love online learning.
That's great. Yeah, I can certainly say I was doing online stuff before COVID, but after COVID, it all ramped up. And yeah, I mean, there's just endless possibilities. And then it's so scalable. I would never otherwise be able to meet with people that couldn't make it to Boston, so now you can see a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't have access to you. So that's always an advantage as well.
Really beautiful because we were running a book club again because like we've got these books we really want to make it interactive because there's one thing buying a book and then it's another thing reading it and then actually like retaining information and then making it applicable. So we're running Matt and I were running these book clubs for the physiology of yoga, like an 8-week course, and it was just amazing. We're getting people from all over the world. It was just so lovely.
Yeah, I
And
love
our books are now being translated into all these different languages. So we're reaching people that we literally never imagined we would reach in Russia and Korea and China, all over. It's really it's been that's kind of the blessing in disguise over the last few years of COVID and everything is just I just was put out of my comfort zone in terms of online stuff, and now I've fully embraced it, and I just feel like I can reach more people. So
Yeah, that's fantastic. That is awesome. So tell me, like, and for the listener, of course, where can they get in touch with you? What's your Instagram handle and what's your website?
yeah, so Instagram's at Dr. Yogi, so all spelled out, Doctor Yogi. I post pretty regularly on there. And my website is dr-yogi.com. And I think the best way to stay in touch with me is I have a weekly newsletter that I put a lot of effort into, super informative. Um, so people really enjoy that. I get lovely feedback from people, and people like print it out and stuff. It's really sweet to hear that kind of feedback when you put so much effort into it. So yeah, I would say sign up for my newsletter. It's going to keep you informed with all of my comings and goings. And then later in the month, we will fully publicly launch the Enlightened Yoga Collective. And the beautiful thing is I'm really all about accessibility. So there's a free tier on there where you can get access to 3 or 4 courses. There's a lot of beautiful information. So even if you feel like you can't, financially afford one of the paid tiers, come and join the community, make the most of the free resources on
Yeah.
there. And yeah,
That's
it's
great. That's
exciting.
an exciting endeavor and offer to be able to share with yoga teachers. So that sounds really cool. Okay, well, stay on because I'm going to end the call or end the podcast for the listener, and we can do some wrap up after. But thank you so much for being on the show. This was like a very spirited conversation, and I loved the way it just flowed. So I really
I,
appreciate.
I really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you for all the great questions, and we'll do part 2 at some point. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye bye for now.